If this is a new world and a new so-called metaverse, this is an opportunity to enhance and design new cultural experiences in this sort of art, science medium, whatever this is, in this new medium, this new media, which I think will occupy our future.
Welcome back to the UX Usability Podcast. I'm Dr. Chris Parker, and today we're talking about one of the most seductive, most engaging, and most exciting technologies in the world that if you can master, it'll open a whole new world to you. We're talking about virtual reality. Now, when I was a small kid, there was a program called Tomorrow's World in the UK, and it was this weekly science program. Now, I was the geekiest kid in the school. I didn't even know it. Whilst all the other kids were running off, watching Power Rangers, I was at home watching Tomorrow's World and learning about the kind of science technology that was just groundbreaking at the time. And this one episode has stuck in my mind for the last 30 years, and that was virtual reality from the 1990s. And they're talking about going to centres, and rather than having an arcade machine, you have a VR helmet, put it on, and you can be a wizard, and you can go on quests and slay dragons. And 6-year-old me, or 7-year-old me, however young I was, this was the best thing in the world. And you can imagine how exciting I was to hear about a virtual reality place in Year City. So when we were there, I begged my dad to go. I went looking for it, and it would close down because the whole thing just wasn't ready yet. In the 90s, you just couldn't get the level of interaction that today you do. And what we now have is technologies where you might experience at home already, and if you haven't, soon I hope you will, where you put a helmet on and you're transported to a world, a 3D world where everything looks familiar, but in some way it looks better. You can have more amazing superpowers than you could ever have in reality. At its best, it draws you in. It creates a wonder that flat screens just cannot capture. And done well, you're left with a feeling that this is how all entertainment must be. This is how we must experience the world. To the point where you start believing this fantasy world is real, and you start missing it when you're not there. And that's at its best, it's the core. As UX designers, this has a huge potential to be a weapon in our arsenal that we must engage in. But there is a flip side. At its worst, it is disappointing. It's something where you look at the inside of the helmet, and maybe it's a 360 video and you can look around, but everything's flat. Maybe there's no dynamic interaction. There might be sound, but it's just flat. There's no stereo, there's no spatial audio quality, you don't really feel anything. And you put this helmet on, you just walk away thinking, that's not what I went for. It's like being sold the best theme park ride and getting a small scooter. So learning these design techniques, these design cues, is absolutely vital to taking VR to the next level. And it's these things which right now it's quite difficult to learn. It's quite difficult to access how to do this right. So any of you who are starting to learn Unity or developing anything about VR interactions, or just having designed student projects, what to do, how to do it, how it should look, how to feel, the design process, these are all mysteries to most of us, even us who are experienced in UX design. It's a new field, new frontier, it's a mystery. So today, we are going to go beyond the veil, and we're going to look at how to design incredible VR experiences. And these lessons which you can take on and use in your professional career, hopefully in your VR interactions, but even if you're just designing basic apps, or you're making something which is software on a computer or a website, there's parts of this which you can apply, parts of this thinking, especially in the next 10, 20 years when these new interaction technologies start merging with existing frameworks. So this is a critical part of relearning your UX design skills. Our guest tonight is Frank Spillers, CEO and founder of Experience Dynamics and one of the most insightful, engaging and dynamic people in UX today. We're going to talk about UX design, we're going to talk about VR and what makes incredible experiences. And if you find this interesting and want to know more, then Frank also runs his Inner Circle, which is UX mentoring service every month, so you can take your skills to the next level. Well, I'm going to speak more about that after the interview, so sit back, get a coffee, and listen to one of the most mind-blowing interviews we've done to date.
Well, I'll tell you maybe about, let's talk about the excitement about VR right now, the fact that we're talking about this. I was just meeting an old friend of my wife's who she hadn't seen in like 30 years or something, and he's like an investor, and he said to me, the first thing he said to me was like, VR is the future, like, and I really want to get invested in this. And I said to him, well, the reason there's a lot of excitement right now is because of the metaverse and, Facebook's like shift to meta. So all of a sudden VR has had this sort of like new focus, this new energy, this new excitement around it just recently with Facebook's news like that. And what I said to him is that about the excitement around VR, it's great to see it. Like I've been around VR for 25 years, a little over, actually closer to 27 years. And I said to him, look, you'll see VR in maybe in a couple of different phases from what I could tell. So it's not, because he's like, this is a big year for VR, and I was like, and he's like, and it's a big year for you, and I liked his enthusiasm, but I also tried to tell him, and I don't know how open he was to hearing this, but I was trying to tell him that I'm a little guarded on over optimism. I'll talk a little bit about Facebook, but what I said to him is I see VR in two waves, in 5 years and in around 10 years, at the, maybe around the eight year mark. And the thing that will shift the first phase will be Apple's VR headset play and their integration, Apple's understanding of an integrated product, service, and also developer ecosystem. So you'll have like app developers in an app store model for VR experiences and so forth and so on. So that will bring the thing into consumer acceptance, which sadly is not in a place for that still. Even though headset sales are growing, Oculus 2 is a pretty decent headset if you can get logged in, because Facebook at least still, even though Mark Zuckerberg recently said he knows it's an issue and he wants to fix it and remove the Facebook connection to logging into the Oculus store or whatever to get your apps. I'm locked out, and it keeps saying to me like log into Facebook, so I do, and then it says log into Oculus, and then I do, and then it says you need to log into Facebook, and it just sends me in this. So it's like this broken touch point, and it's like wow, and that little broken touch point, which seems really trivial, is also the reason why that Facebook is in a Meta, I should call them, is in a seriously rough place in terms of user adoption and acceptance, and also as being the sort of arbiters or the stewards of this metaverse that they're trying to roll into. And they can do it at the company level and the branding level, but can they do it at the user level? Here's a company that's in a rough place with regard to user privacy. We heard a story just in the metaverse beta about a gang rape. I don't know if you heard that story.
It sounds terrible.
Yeah, well, it's sexual harassment and privacy violations are a known issue in VR. And who are they known by? They're known by Facebook. Oculus research team put out a paper. You can download it off the the Meta website. I need to keep reminding myself that it's Meta, but it'll always be Facebook to me. that you can download this research paper about how to design and mitigate against sexual harassment in VR on the Meta website. I do note that there is a broken link on Google, so you have to go into their website, search for it. That's also these little silly details are also important to me because they show that this is not on their radar. If you look in Meta's kind of press area where they talk about the vision for VR and for the metaverse, it doesn't include privacy. It doesn't include a link to that research or to any other. It doesn't talk about how they're going to protect users and safety. Now, if you look at studies, including their own research team, and don't get me wrong, Facebook had a great social VR research team. Absolutely, from what I could tell, top notch. They knew what they were talking about. It checked in with my work, with what I've been tracking, and also my recent work with VR UX and social and collaborative. That's kind of my area, social VR. And I was really impressed, except for I remember in this 2015-16, I think when they launched the first version of their social VR, I also could not connect. So we had in our VR lab, we had two different rooms. So we had two different headsets, and we were trying to connect and just meet together in the shared space, and we just couldn't do it. And we're both the two people that were doing this, by the way, are very seasoned VR sort of folks. It's not like this was not for user testing. So Facebook comes from knowing this is an issue. Their beta tester now, she was sort of attacked. It turns out that the surveys the research shows that it's 50% of female users have been sexually harassed inappropriately, sort of, because this is avatar, right? So this is just virtual, but unfortunately our brains process virtual as if real. There's a lot of research to show that as well, that we just take things literally, essentially. And so there's almost this secondhand trauma that you can get from being sort of abused, bullying, sexual harassment, and other types of, inappropriate social behavior. So 50% of women and 35% of men. It's like 85% of all users have had issues with this. It's not a fringe thing. It's not it's core to social VR UX design, and Facebook knows it. But unfortunately, they are not addressing it. And I think it's a cultural issue. It's a little bit like Uber. Do you remember Uber's CEO with the sexism, and he eventually had to leave? And of course, this is slightly different because it's to the users, not within the company, right? In terms of this violation. So it's not like Mark Zuckerberg's going to have to leave because of the privacy. Otherwise, he would have left 10 years ago because he's been violating privacy by design, and not being safe. And Facebook's done a lot of things to mitigate, but unfortunately the culture and the sort of attitudes are not there for this. So there's barriers to adoption from Facebook with Metaverse. It's great to see the energy and the excitement building for VR right now, but there are key challenges for user adoption, and we need to open the floodgates and address those head on, with courage, with precision, knowing there's a lot of research and there's a lot of data around this topic. Like I said, even Oculus's own research team published a wonderful paper on this topic. But it sort of needs to be tackled before we can sort of say, oh yeah, we're all going to be in the metaverse, and we're all going to be comfortable being in the metaverse.
What you're saying about sort of people abusing each other, at one level, that's incredibly shocking and surprising, because you watch Mark Zuckerberg's Meta announcement and it's fun and games and fireworks, and why can't we all live this way?
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, Reddit, you post an opinion on Reddit, which can be as vanilla as you like, someone's going to attack you and jump down your throat within 5 seconds. Right. And you kind of get to the point now, we go, okay, that's the internet, that's Reddit, we know it's a cesspit, and go, well, why? Those people are just going to transfer to this virtual world. They're not going to become wonderful Buddhist monks.
Right.
So what do we do about this? How can we create, usability issues like we can't connect?
Yeah.
That's a relatively easy thing we can solve with just good design use testing. But how do we solve these human issues?
Yeah. So here's what I said to this guy, the investor that I was telling you about this, like, it's a big year for VR and I really want to invest in this. And is what I said to him is, do you want me to tell you what the killer app is for VR? In order to bring because I said to him, look, the vision of VR has been there from the beginning. It's core to the definition of computing. In the late 1960s, you got Ivan Sutherland, the University of Utah, the sword of Damocles, the thing you pull down like a submarine. The vision of computing was for high fidelity sensory information broadcast to the eyes, ears, and more, touch and so forth, and even smell. If you had like Morton Heilig, this guy who created this cinema Rama thing where it's like a little bicycle with a little kind of almost a video arcade, and he had smells coming in there, and he had like almost like 3D graphics and sounds, and so it was super cool, kind of like 1970s kind of thing. Part of the history of VR and part of the history of computing. Unfortunately, we went to these boring desktop sort of and laptop sort of form factors. And then we went to mobile, which is got all the addictive and sort of the stuff that you talked about, the Reddit type of, and more. And, if you're in the social networking business, you're highly aware of this. There's a great new documentary called The Instagram Effect that the BBC put out. And that's amazing. It's really, I think I might watch it a second time. It's got great source interviews with people that are directly worked on product and in these companies. So it's like the wake up call, and it's about harm and safety. Designing for safety. So I said to this investor, "What's the killer app for VR?" Is culture, and he was like, "What?" That was like. It's culture. Specifically, we need how we get around this problem, because it's a cultural problem. In other words, what's a cultural problem? Well, look at VR. Look, where's all the growth in VR? Where has it been in the last 5 or 6 years since the rewarming coming out of the nuclear winter of VR, which was like a 25 year. Sorry, no, wait. Yeah, it was about 15, 16, 17 years or something, from like the late 90s to mid 2015 or 2016 or something. It reopened up. And what you had is like a focus on gaming. So gamers, gaming. Even when Apple released AR Kit and the AR Core, is AR Core, AR Kit, Google and Apple's for the high-end phones, augmented reality. You look at the content, and the content is all sort of like male sports type stuff or action sort of games. So we've got that topic covered. What we need is a broader inclusion. So it kind of speaks to inclusive design. We need diverse voices. We need women. We need people of color, people with disabilities, people from different ethnicities, different social backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. We need the wider community to help define what the content is going to be that's compelling, that makes them come back, and so forth and so on. So, of course, partly technological. Like I said, that technology, I think, will evolve and advance. I'm also looking forward to the day where we can have flat screen, interface. Like my vision of VR from a day-to-day living perspective is that you wake up and you install kind of like wallpaper in the 1960s. Remember when people started putting up their own wallpaper? You ever hear about that? People, 60s and 70s was like this wallpaper revolution where people would be like, I'm putting up my own wallpaper, and you'd have all this weird. So you go into old houses.
You went from beige to crazy stuff because you could.
To psychedelic sort of looking wallpaper, and weird patterns. Yeah, exactly. So if we can get that level of DIY, of do it yourself, with setting up your own sort of liquid crystal, sort of very thin displays that you can maybe move them around like a picture, but I'm talking maybe even full wall size, so maybe, I don't know, 15 feet by 15 feet, maybe something like that, fill the entire wall. And that then you can, even without any hardware, you can participate, right? So it's very interesting if you look at the guy who gave us the term virtual reality, Jaron Lanier. If you follow his work, it's quite interesting because it follows the evolution of VR, and it kind of points to where the future might be. Because he truly was, among other people, and note that his partner with VPL back in the early 90s was the company he set up where he created this virtual reality built for two. Reality built for two is called RB2. His partner was African American guy. So you don't hear about that. You hear about Jaron. But Jaron's work from like 2000 to like 2010, 12 or something was to prove the concept of tele-immersion is what we call it. So it's like, think of it like long distance video conferencing, but then you can sort of move objects across a screen. So people are in different cities on different sort of sides of the wall that you're around.
Oh yeah, I've seen this. It looks like a big room with a huge desk in, but it's only half a desk.
Yeah. So what was cool about that project, it was part of like Internet 2. There was a sort of backbone academic high-speed Internet 2, but they actually proved it on low speed as well. So using like video capture cameras in the corners of the room, and the whole point of that was sort of how do you create these sort of a sort of teleimmersion without the need for a headset, without the need to log into bloody Facebook, or Oculus or whichever one you want me to log into. I've got them both. I submit, I just want to get into the damn thing, Yeah,
over here I've got my off camera my Steampowered Oculus Go, which it's a fun toy. I kind of want to give it to my son for him to play with. Because whenever I play with it, I'm like, this is very underwhelming. I'm not really... As a kid in the 90s, I was watching the science programs about this is VR, this is the future, right before the nuclear winter you're talking about. And I was so excited as a kid. And now it's here. It's, Yeah, exactly. And so it's a content issue, compelling content. So forget the hardware, forget the vision of, the liquid crystal, the sort of, but we do need sort of like multiple levels of participation so that you don't, you can participate by your phone or by your iPad or by your, or different cross devices instead of this proprietary, Google Pixel only works with a Google Pixel phone or only works with that kind of like platform or device wars is not conducive to business. And if we don't overcome industry problems at that level, we're going to end up with, this essentially the Chinese are going to sort of sell us the handsets, the networks, and the devices, and that sort of work with anything. Or so, I don't know. It's like a country like China, for example, that looks across ecosystem and doesn't sort of, or Korea or Indonesia or Japan does similar stuff like that. So getting all that straightened out, of course, but for me, like, the content, that's what you said, the lack of compellingness. When I first checked out an Oculus Quest 2, we're actually doing some, it was part of a user testing we were doing in a healthcare experience that we were redesigning. And so we thought we'd throw a VR piece in there and just bought an Oculus Quest 2 and took it straight out into the field and just tested this VR experience. What was interesting, by the way, on that test is that the kids, these were children, they loved the novelty. They were like, oh, this is so cool. Even though they couldn't actually do the thing they were doing, they were just so impressed with it, and it overshadowed everything else we were doing. So there's the novelty is okay. The novelty, we're novelty seeking kind of creatures as humans. So, but like, it's like you say, Chris, like once you go in, are you going to come back? It's like when I went into this, there's a meditation experience, I think, or something like this in
it wasn't social VR. It was sort of you do it on your own. Because I know there are social VR versions of this. And then there was the other experience that I was super excited to try out was the let's see, what are they called now? I can't think of their name. They're a social VR. Maybe better if I don't mention them, actually, because then
oh yeah,
they're
don't get
super
sued.
popular in business. And I went into that environment. So the meditation one was like blah. I was like, it didn't really. And they actually asked, how do you feel now? And then afterwards, they're like, how do you feel now? And I was like, same. And it was just not compelling. And it was one of the top rated sort of experiences for this sort of like. I guess I won't mention that name either, but to the business one, it was supposed to be social VR where you go in and it's a collaborative space. And they even let you kind of scan an avatar very quickly of yourself, a physical avatar. It's amazing. That's an amazing onboarding. So you drop in. And what's the first thing that you want to do in social VR? And my point here is that there's a lack of understanding of social or collaborative design. So it's the first thing you want to do when you get in social VR.
Say hi.
What's that?
Say hi.
Say hi to like interact with someone?
Well, yeah, like my friend's over there. Like, hi, Bill, how you doing?
Yeah, and if it's not your friend, maybe it's an AI or an avatar or a support person or maybe another member of the community or something. Maybe another person who's also a newbie like you, or maybe someone who's maybe each person has to be a shepherd for the new person for a few minutes. And, it'd be like, hey, someone needs help. So you're like, yeah, okay. And you get points for helping people or something. I don't know, But so I went into the space and it was like a room, no people, no interaction. There was a bunch of junk. There was like a car in a 3D car that you could, I was like, what's that with a wheel? There was all these kind of like interfaces and all these objects and clutter. And I was like, what is that? Was the onboarding to this like supposed to be like a sort of business type collaborative space. And I just thought, what the hell is this? It's almost just that what I saw in around the 2015, 2017 period was doing it just because you can, or designing something that creates fear and adrenaline. This is typical in game design, fear and adrenaline, because that's the cheapest emotion going. Just ask any politician or dictator, right? You can, you can. And so it actually turns out that like with VR, you have to use emotion design. So there's this field of UX called emotion design, or this sort of technique. And you have to do it in VR because VR is so cool, right? It requires that engagement. It requires emotion. It requires social design or social interaction, or what we call sociability. It requires these areas of UX that don't get a lot of kind of airtime, if you will. They don't get a lot of play. And they're actually some of the most interesting because you can create rich, deep interactions and collaborations beyond just shooting something behind a tree. That's pretty easy to do, but it's like, or having a rotating 3D car or whatever, like you can do anything, but do you really want to do it? Should you do it? And see, I think the problem is people designing content for VR need more exposure to the real world. And I think we need to, if we're going to include other people in it and not just VR enthusiasts or gamers or folks that are technically inclined or that can, buy the hardware and deal with all the complexity of sort of like going into the stores and downloading apps and maintaining their, updating this and updating that and charging this and, this controller and that controller and, knowing what a controller is and knowing how to hold it. And there's a gamey kind of thing with the hardware today, the sort of joysticky download apps, like it's inheriting the gaming culture. That's not good for future adoption. That means it stays in a bubble and just grows in the gaming community. From a business standpoint, that's great because you can just make lots of money. It's just the new gaming is VR. But from a wider adoption to follow that sort of computing vision and to sort of, extend Jaron Lanier's work and definition, I want to see like he worked at Microsoft research in the last 10 years or so, and he worked on teleimmersion, but kind of like with through HoloLens, so sort of holograms and that kind of Star Trekky kind of beaming people into the room and as a avatar, and also some social stuff too, where you can sort of like give a fist bump. Like why can't we give a fist bump across Zoom or across current? Why can't we have like a pad, like a mouse pad, that's tactile, where I can like sort of like shake your hand or I wanted to high five my project manager recently, and I was like, if I just had like a little board next to that I don't know, that's all you do. It's sort of like the fart machine on the early phones, the apps, the fart machine.
Yeah,
fart
it reminds
apps.
me of an app years and years ago called Bump, and the idea was amazing that you've got this app, and I turn it on, you turn yours on, we fist bump,
Right.
and it swaps details, so you could just go fist bumping at conferences, and you got everyone there. Totally. It's a really fun, wonderful idea if you've got the app and you want to use it. And as soon as someone doesn't, you go, oh, wait, oh, no, you get this, download that, and it starts falling apart. Yeah. So I think if you get some kind of universal haptics, then we can start getting some great things. This idea they're talking about with really great content and everything came from games. I've heard you talk in the past about story and story arcs and VR being very important. Yeah. When we're talking about making a game, obviously story arcs, you'd be crazy not to. And if you had something like a brand experience, so let me understand what Gucci's about, then story arc obviously comes in. But if you're in a collaborative space, which is a very tool-like functional idea, how would story arc apply to that to create this really wonderful content, or is there something else, a different mindset?
I totally believe that. So first of all, just to reinforce what you said, storytelling is an essential VR skill. It's you have to. So, and that means emotion. Hello, right? Sound. Hello. I remember some of the recent generation of VR designers that I was at a conference in 2015 or 16 in Seattle, and there was quite an advanced VR community in Seattle and San Francisco, and Portland as well, but they're a little sharper in Seattle and San Francisco because they have the Human Interface Technology Lab in Seattle, which is where the great-grandfather of virtual reality, Tom Furness, is. So you get a lot of sort of highly educated VR people in Seattle because of that. So it's just a thing. And I remember going into this, there were people saying, is sound important in VR? And I was like, my God, sound is so important. Can you imagine watching a movie without, and there are movies that don't get this, and they don't use the sound effects, and they don't do the soundscape. Even if you look at people like Hans Zimmer, who does like the majority of all the great movies, he says the way they make movies now is they lay down the soundscape first, and then they build a narrative around that. Yeah, they front load the sound dictates it's like an emotional map, and then they build a narrative on top of that. It's crazy. And that's what he said. That's
genius.
It's kind of cool. So sound, the reason why sound is important, by the way, in VR is it carries bad graphics, bad experience. It carries deficits, right? So where you might not, where your images may not be up to speed, or you don't really have, it doesn't, it's sort of like, what's this? Where's this? The sound can drop you into that space. It can pull you, especially if it's spatialized 3D, can pull you in a direction. So the other thing that pulls you or pushes you is story. So you see I mentioned fear. Fear is used like way too much in VR pieces. And it's just like, what's the only emotion that we have to work with? Fear. Well, what else do we have to, come on. Like, what about joy and surprise and, excitement and anticipation? These are emotions that are rich for VR, that you can. So the question though that you asked, Chris, was, how about boring experiences, what we call B2B, like business to business, or how about serious, like healthcare, or like, serious stuff. And I actually believe that it's a missed opportunity. if you don't employ the same mechanics that you would for an entertainment or just like some narrative, that some experience, some immersive experience, that it's so important to use them. And let me see if I can give it some tangible examples, because it's like, well, what do you mean? So just one of the most simple AR experiences, just to jump to AR for a minute, because the overlap is there and will be there and should be there and everything. So just a mapping app that takes you down the street, and or maybe it's for a delivery driver, maybe it's for someone who's delivering, and it's like there's an arrow going this way. Sound can be used. So for example, if you turn the corner, you could have like clapping. You'd be like, oh, that's great. You could almost be like a theater performance where the person's like, and the sound could pull them in that direction. So the sound, you could have like sound if it's appropriate. If it's noisy, it's not going to be as appropriate. In VR, a little easier because you're sort of controlling the sound, the acoustics in the headset experience. But to say like a serious situation like a healthcare, like or a mechanical, you see a lot of the VR and a lot of the HoloLens. Like Microsoft chose to just focus on B2B with HoloLens. And what was weird is they created all this amazing narrative stuff, like story type pieces, and showing the way that HoloLens can do that. They created these nice demo pieces but then all the applications are business to business, and all the business to business VR developers were not using anything to do with story, barely doing anything with UX, by the way. And because the whole thing was like proof of concept, business to business, serious, yes, entertainment, but check this out. It's actually you can spend money on this. It's okay. Like you can, this will help your team. This will train your team. Training or executing, like turning off buttons and manipulating things in a mechanical sense, or surgery or something in a healthcare sense. So in those situations, story can be very powerful because in VR and immersive media, you only have a short attention span. You only have a short amount of time. In movie making, you have like 20 minutes to like build this sort of exposition, this sort of like, these are the characters, this is the background, 10, 20 minutes. If you don't have that built, by the way, after like 20 or 30 minutes, you lose people. I watched a movie recently and I was like, okay, I got the background. What's going to happen next? And it was like 35, 40 minutes in to an hour and a half movie. And I was like, and I just stopped watching it. So in VR, what that looks like is doing that in the first couple of minutes. So, because these experiences are 10, 20 minutes max in an immersive situation. And the expectation from users is also these days, at least as we know it now, is that you're only going to spend 10, 20 minutes in there. So in a piece like that, you want to, in the first minute or two, you want to use story to pull. So you might say say take the medical one maybe to begin with. You might be like, you might go in and then a voice says like, okay, the patient is prepped and ready to go. Now, you might want to know a few things about the patient. And that information, maybe say the information is not available. So let's assume that this patient has had bad experiences in hospitals before, and let's assume that there's some kind of traumatic experience, that maybe their interaction with a doctor has been traumatic. Because, for example, I'm thinking about there's a Minnesotan rapper who's Lakota. He's Native American, and he had an experience just a couple of years ago. During I think right before or during the COVID, where he was in hospital. He had like a stress-induced kind of seizure type of thing. He went into hospital in Minneapolis. That's where they killed George Floyd, by the way. I'm from Minnesota originally, but so Minnesota's a great place, but some things happen there like that. So he goes in the hospital, and they think that he's they think he's on drugs. They think he's taking. They think he's using, peyote or something. They think, so they test his blood. There's nothing there. They intubate him. They stick a tube down his throat. But he had like a canoeing, a water-based accident where he almost drowned. So he started pulling the tubes out, and they're like, "Oh, you're being non-compliant." So they sedated him, and he also had some like cut marks on his body, which is a part of Lakota ceremony. His family was in the room, and they told the doctor, but the doctor, operating from their kind of, Anglo culture, was like, no, he's been cutting himself. He needs to see a psychiatrist. So they saw the psychiatrist, and they tried to sort of evaluate him and potentially section him. And so it was institutional racism. But so imagine if VR is actually really good, can be good for training if it's designed well. And actually, one of the pioneers in the area of presence, so the feeling that you're there in VR. His name's Mel Slater. He worked at UCL, University College London, for many years, and he's in Barcelona now, working at the university there. But he also has a really cool startup, and what they do is they provide training to help, say, like police departments, healthcare workers with inclusion. And diversity, and like training, better decision making, and they found a lot of really good efficacy. Like it really works if essentially you assume the position of the other person, or changing your perspective and your angle. So story can wrap itself around this. You can sort of like, you can be like, oh, let's just, this patient. You could even show the user. He'd be like, this patient had some very bad. There's this thing called hospitalization experience. So it's patients are stressed out by being in a hospital. Now, just imagine that people that work in hospitals are not stressed out there. So that's the user of the VR piece, right? So they're learning VR's help medical student or a physician or something that's using this VR piece. And they don't. I know this because I worked in a situation recently, and I was like, bringing this up from a UX perspective. And I know the guy that worked, the clinician, it was like, he works in the hospital, and he was like, that's not, is that really that important? And I was like, and if you look in the literature, if you go look at the NIH, the National Institute of Health, if you search their databases for anxiety and stress and hospitalization, it's like a known thing. It's a known thing in the literature, that hospitalization. So as a UX designer, if you're designing an experience within a hospital, you have to be sensitive. So you might build that in to your VR piece, and you might say like, this patient has had some, you might want to don't assume this patient is like, so this patient has the stress of the actual injury or incident. They have the stress of, so you might teach this as part of the VR piece. So it's almost like someone coaching you, and you're like, okay, do you got that? And you're like, yeah, I got that. So then you go in, and you might, add like some like voices that sort of reinforce things for you. Like if it's a medical student and you're trying to give them confidence, you might say, "You got this. Just remember the checklist. Just remember your checklist." You might have like little voices like help, so you almost feel like you're in this kind of like real situation. And then you might do the same thing with a character. The character you might take that story I was telling you about, the rapper that actually happened, and you might you might say, the patient might start like like going and you say, and then the question is it the symptoms, or is it this hospitalization experience? And so go through the checklist. Okay, check his pulse, check his vitals, check the history, see what they're in for. Also check their cultural background. Do they need any, is there any sensitivity that you might have, so that you're cross-culturally sensitive, so you have what's called cultural competence. So I'm sort of blending it in that example. I'm like blending in just also the need that we need to bring that sort of focus to our content design. We need to bring, when we create content, we need to understand opportunities to reach out to folks who might not be part of a traditional sort of VR design sort of project.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a bit like you were saying earlier, those core UX skills you're missing from part of the conversation, where the first thing learning UX design is empathize with your users. Who are they? Why are they feeling this way? How can we work with that? Seems to be missing. But think about what you're saying about making these functional experiences really engaging. The way you're describing it sounds wonderful, and I'd love to work with this tool. what do you say to people who go, well, those are great for learning, those are great for edutainment, but when VR matures, we're going to get down to some very serious work, and we're going to abandon those fun things. What would you say to that?
What do you mean? What fun things is that? Like,
okay, so what you say about like introduce the patient and have
right, these sort of narrative devices. Yeah,
these sound really awesome and really engaging, but people might go, well, when VR grows up, we're not going to need those fun things. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think well, VR as we've seen it now is taking the approach that you're saying, this sort of grown-up approach, as opposed to this sort of like more play version. And I actually think we'll move more towards immersive story, and like we need the very successful past that we know is like the blending of, say, like learning or like edutainment, basically, or educommerce or whatever. So it's the same with social VR. So if you just go into a social space and there's no people, or if you go into a social space and your avatar is female and it's being attacked, you're probably going to leave. You're probably not. But if you go into a social space and the system knows that you have a female avatar, so let's add story and that playfulness, that what we call playability, or that designing for fun or emotion into this, right? This scenario, you go into a space, you've got a female avatar. The system knows this, right? So the system, so immediately you hear like, hey, what, like, who's that? Who just came in here? So something to warn you that maybe to like watch out. And so the point isn't to induce. You might say, well, you're just inducing fear, Frank. You just talked about, fear being like just cheap emotion. You shouldn't be so keen to use. And what you might do is you might say immediately. So that's like an auditory UI. So it's like part of the sort of onboarding. You hear that, and then it says, if you ever have any problems, in other words, here's your pepper spray. If you ever have any problems, here's your safety bubble. The companies I mentioned, Oculus Research, knew about sexual harassment, and Facebook just seems to be very, very slow to address it. They still haven't said anything about it. I'm sure they're scrambling behind the scenes. Like, trust me, they're not just sitting there twiddling their thumbs drinking a latte. But right, but what I was going to say was that the previous, so this is a known issue as of 2015. 2017, it happened again in another social, so VR chat, and then a couple other social VR experiences. It happened. One of the CEO of one of those companies was so appalled that he immediately said, like, let's address this. Within like a month or two, VR chat created a personal privacy bubble. One of the other ones did the same thing. So you can activate a privacy bubble so people can't come near you. So you prevent, you build safety in, and you prevent that. So in order to so the question is like, I didn't know there was a safety bubble. I got attacked, right? So what I'm saying is, with this potential design idea, you have this, hey, what do you do? Hey, what you doing down here? Like, or what's going, or like, or whatever, like you get like, cause so the environment sort of responds to you. But it says like, if you get any attack, here's your privacy bubble. Here's your emergency. Here's your bail switch. Or here's your superpower sort of, here's your like a ripcord, like an emergency ripcord. Like we have these metaphors in real life. It's not like they don't, but the problem is, as male designers, for example, we don't know what that is. We don't know what safety is from a gender perspective as men. And so a lot of men that might be involved, and there are a lot of women involved in VR, actually, but as men involved in VR, that's a bias that you might not be aware of, and I know I speak from experience. That's my, I've only recently come to sort of appreciate the depth of, because it's just not a lived experience. So you just go, like Mark Zuckerberg or this sort of tech bro, you go, oh, yeah, that's not an issue. Like, how many years did Mark Zuckerberg say privacy is not an issue, and then, sort of backtracked and still struggles with it, because it's sort of endemic to the way the business model is. But so I actually think, contrary to sort of the removing fun and removing aspects of sociability, I actually think that if you understand emotion design and you understand how story play factors in, you can create little micro stories. They're sort of like UI triggers, So for example, here's another one. Back in the doctor's office, doctor gets up to the table and there's like a set of tools, right? So maybe we played out the one where the patient, trying to socialize the hospitalization and sort of the cultural background. We played that out, and it's like, so maybe that's part of the test is how to deal with a patient and not just treat the physical side of it or whatever, the medical side of it, but also the social side of that intervention. So then he's ready for the tools, or the person, the user, the doctor's ready for the tools, the med student, let's say the medical student, and picks up one of the tools. Yeah. And so normally in VR, you need to know that's an affordance. Like you need to know you can pick that up. So we usually put like a highlight around it or something so you can grab it with your essential controller, right? So you're holding a controller, you click it and pick up the tool. And the boring version, Chris, is you just use the tool. The instructional version is you pick up the tool and it says, now proceed with incision, left side. Maybe there's an audio or there's a visual marker showing you the place where to make the cut on the mannequin or the person. But the story side, here's the story side, is you pick up the tool and on the other side of the tool, it says top 3 mistakes for making an incision are like, and then someone there's like it's almost like you want to make sure you start just a 1/4 centimeter below the thing, and also don't pull too hard, right? It's and it might, so it's like, oh right, okay, and then you continue with it and the tool goes away. But if you need it, it's almost like a talking shell, it's almost like the talking shell. So then you're like, what else is here on the table? So you pick up another tool, and the other tool goes, I've been doing medicine for 45 years, and I find that if you say to the patient, if you tell the patient what their name is, and tell them what you're about to do in a gentle voice, they'll be much. Oh, okay, thanks. So it's almost like these talking tools. Well, that sounds like something for children. That's that like fun. But that's exactly like the environment of VR is an environment for imagination expansion. And when you design for VR, you also need to apply that same set of, otherwise you end up with boring, and people are not going to adopt boring. Things that are engaging, that are novel, that the real world doesn't do. Things like smells. See how dogs go up to things and the dogs read like the daily newspaper. Which other dog peed here? Which other dog is releasing these hormones? There's like when dogs, they don't glance at the news. They what do they have, like 70,000 receptors in their nose or something?
Yeah, well, a whole organ for it.
A whole floor, yeah. They've got like a brain in their nose. Well, that to me is a lovely space to bring into a VR design, because not that you can smell as a user in VR, not yet anyway, or whatever, right? But the idea that something has a memory embedded in it, has a scent, So, for example, I walk up to the cockpit or the buttons and the designs, and I see a button or a little screen with my name on it or somebody's name on it. But then there's like a leak, almost like steam coming out of it. And the steam has like maybe even just like a clue for it. And I go, what's that? So I select that. And what I see is the last 4 users that were at this station. And I see a history, but it's in like almost in a smell, or it's in like this other, sort of crossing of senses of like, visual and...
I'm imagining ghosts. That
yes, exactly, yes.
They fade away over time.
Yes. These are just like some sort of off-the-cuff ideas of sort of how it applies, but if you string those together, you get story. So these are random. I mentioned one thing, and it's like, well, what does one thing have to do with the other? But if you built it around a narrative and use some sort of narrative mechanics. So, for example, if the student is taking too long, or the worker is taking too long on the interface, you could start the walls could start, the floor could start like sort of like almost like shaking a bit, or the machine could start like trembling a little bit, and it's like, well, what's that? And it's like the goal is to like get this done as quickly as possible, as accurately as possible, and then get out of there, because then the place might collapse or blow up, or who knows what. Or maybe there's an angry boss. You could use the tension of, there's like an angry boss, an AI that comes over and looks over you and goes, "What? All good here? Everything okay?" And then you're the user, and you go, "Oh my God, what's that?" And then walks away. So that's like a narrative device, is like another character, even though that's nothing to do with you doing a serious job of like mechanically like configuring a system or changing buttons or pulling levers or fixing something. You have that type of like a real world pressure, of another force, a social force that's coming into your task and sort of like causing you to go, "Oh, geez, I better," and be like, or he looks and he says, "Oh, lunch break coming up soon. We better get this done," And so instead of saying to the user, like the boring way would just be to have a countdown timer and say, "You have 2 minutes to complete this task," and then count down 159, 158, 157. That would be a boring UI. The more imaginative one, using the medium of immersion and story, would be to have the guy come over and go, "You've been on this task for like 2 minutes, and it's only a total of 3 minutes. We've got a new set of workers coming in here, and you don't even have to have a character. You could just have a voice. You could do the whole thing through sound and use an auditory story narrative, So it doesn't have to be, because the other thing, one of the interesting things about the accessibility guidelines for users with disabilities, they now, in WCAG 3.0, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 3.0, they now include VR, thankfully, finally. So what that means for blind users is don't rely on visuals. So you almost need that also that auditory design, or that audio design to guide the user through. That was actually that's what I did my master's research in, by the way, is auditory spatial cognition in collaborative virtual environments back in the 90s. But so it's a fascinating area for me. I've always been intrigued by the possibilities there.
That's definitely going to be an amazing area going forward, because I was thinking how easy it is to get Adobe Atmos in our homes now. Like Apple Music have a whole little tab for, spatial audio. And so like, well, at the moment, I've not really been that impressed by what I've heard, because it's quite a new thing. But we could be in our living room having like a spatial game around us, or some kind of immersive experience just in sound and voices.
Right.
And I really can't wait for that kind of thing to get out of the niche example into this is life.
Yeah, no, same here. Yeah, I can't wait to get into that. And I think one of our challenges is going to be that this is too much. Like you know what I mean by that, in the sense that you scare people. You might scare children. You might scare. In other words, if you take what I was saying about understanding like stress states in hospital, just take that into the street. There's a great book I just read called Design for Real Life, and there's another book called Design for Safety. Two really great books on that are sort of hovering around the topics that I've been talking about. But if you take that sort of onto the street, that idea of stress, and it's just you have someone that comes home from work, they've had a very stressful day, maybe they're going through a divorce, maybe their child is sick, their pet is dying or has cancer or something. Pet stress, my little cat has got some issues, so I've seen the pet stress uphand very recently. So you factor all that in, and then you get into your deluxe VR experience. It might be too much, and that's why we should start understanding and learning about cultures beyond our own, but also it's really designing this. If this is a new world and a new so-called metaverse, this is an opportunity to enhance and design new cultural experiences in this sort of art, science medium, whatever this is, in this new medium, this new media, which I think will occupy our future. I think it'll do it in different ways, through holograms and through short throw projectors and through lots of built-in cameras that sense and that we can control. But we have this massive uphill battle to sort of understand how we can shape that in a way that people find meaningful and find relevant, where they can use it, where they can feel comfortable, where they can use it as easily as a phone. How do you get VR to be as easily used as a phone? And the phone is maybe not the best example, because the phone is not a social device per se. What you do so you text people, you call people, that aspect from device to device is social. But kind of like what you talked about, bumping fists or bumping phones is a little closer. But then how do you do that virtually? So we haven't crossed into media truly. Social media is just a joke. That's just that's an embarrassment in our human evolution, I think, in a lot of ways, in the sense of what it, and in the sense that it's just a model and we haven't evolved it yet. So social media we can evolve. And by the way, that's why Mark Zuckerberg bought Oculus. That's why he's putting all his money on to Metaverse and Meta with the new naming. Is he knows that Facebook sucks. This is my theory. Is I realized this like when he first introduced when he bought Oculus, that he knows it sucks. He knows you can get better engagement in collaborative spaces, in social spaces, and with real social, where you feel presence. You have an avatar. That avatar feels like you're there. I can exchange like a gigabyte of photos for you. Like Facebook bought a firm called Caffeine many years ago, and they were peer-to-peer. They didn't do anything with it, but they bought the technology. Sort of like in Russia, they have vKontakty, and other countries, they have social networks that are dominant where you can exchange massive amounts. You can do like huge file uploads and exchange. It's like peer-to-peer, basically. And Facebook doesn't really have that, but you can imagine being in VR, and I could invite you, hopefully very easily, into a space of virtual living room, and show you all my photos from my last holiday again, and then the holiday before that, and the holiday before that. And I could take you through rooms of, I could say, let me show you whatever, Caribbean, let me show you Australia, let me show you, and it would just be this massive wall, and that I could then say, oh, and that maybe I've created my own little story, as opposed to just sort of schlepping the photos up on Facebook on the wall, waiting for someone to like it. And so Zuckerberg knows that the money is in the communities. Like the best part of Facebook are in communities, because the values are sort of locked. You're not being trolled by anybody and sort of monetized. And so how do you reproduce that in a virtual space? Well, I don't know if the same team is there. I'm guessing they're not the social VR team at Facebook, but I have a very strong feeling they're not there anymore, because it sort of dissolved. Facebook failed like 2.5 times with social VR, so yeah, whether they're going to usher it in, or I actually think Apple will bring the device, bring the ecosystem, bring the maturity, and then that will fuel, that will help the metaverse. But it's got to be designed from a community-centered perspective. It's got to be inclusive. It's got to be compelling. It's got to be emotional. And you can do that with things like you mentioned, storytelling, and making it more interesting, really, than it ever could be.
Mm. It reminds me of us having a chat with Grace Francis the other day. She's CXO for incredible companies, and if you get a chance to chat with her, she's got a wonderful view of the world. She's saying that social media, all these online interactions are just hollow compared to speaking to real people and being in a room with someone, having a coffee with them. It's something that you can't get on Facebook, and you could abandon technology just to have this wonderful, genuine relationships. So Frank, it's been really amazing listening to you, and I reckon I could listen to you for about another hour. So I was wondering, to kind of wrap up at the end, we've got some great visions of where you can see the world going and what we can do better as designers for VR. What kind of questions do you think we have or problems, like if we can solve this problem, then VR can take that next jump forward?
Yeah, I think, the problem is it's culture. Culture is the killer app. If we can make VR so appealing and so interesting, and attract the values of the people that we want to use it, and create the second one would be a safe and welcoming space. So safety and design, privacy obviously a part of that. And then the third one would be understanding the social and emotional dynamics of how you design and construct these experiences. That's not as well known even in the UX field. It's there in the UX field, but the competency isn't quite there with it. It's even considered almost like a fringe topic or just like a pet topic, but it's actually core to VR. You need that skill. So, so bringing those complements to the challenge are really critical. I can't see any other way, and that's sort of a long view after like sort of 27 years of sort of being with VR and seeing what works. But my standards are also very high. I don't I don't just think it's cool just because it's cool. I value taking a walk in a forest or having a personal conversation. If it's not as good as that as real life, people will not go there. So we've got to make it even better than real life and make it that much more interesting where people want to go there, if you will, and therefore spur adoption.
And that's a really great area. I mean, so many of us work on. I think the social and community is going to be a huge thing. So Frank, it's been wonderful listening to you. I've got one last question, which I'd like to ask all my guests. What do you think would make the world a better place?
Well, you've heard me say, I'm an inclusive design champion. So, I have a little card on my wall here. It says, in this world, there's room for everyone. It's Charlie Chaplin that said that. So I really think that what could make the world a better place is cross-cultural insights and understanding, so that we understand each other much more deeply than it's a miracle that we're able to communicate and work globally with each other and across, so many differences. But I think that's our strength, is that we can get familiar with things we're not familiar with. And so cross-cultural design is another area for me, but it ties in with inclusion. Even if you're trying to do it at home, for a lot of people, it's just the most basic thing from a UX design perspective that could change your world is including just your users in your process, and not just testing, but actually going out and trying to understand what problems they're trying to solve, what issues they've had, what their histories are, what their experiences have been in the area that you're trying to, go, if it's med students, go talk to medical students. If it's, engineers, go talk to engineers, go find out where your leverage points are. But yeah, I think cross-cultural understanding, I think, would be probably one of those big ones.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think we could all embrace that in all our work. So Frank Spillers, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking.
It's been a pleasure talking with you too, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
Once again, I want to thank Frank for his time and contributing to the podcast and being a part of our community here. Now, if you've been listening in and you feel that you want to connect with Frank and take this discussion further, then you should check out Frank Spillers' Inner Circle, which is a mentoring program to help you elevate your practice. Because we all know that if your UX isn't really where it needs to be, if it's not on point, your ability to do what you're trying to do is weakened. You're not going to make as much return on investment, you're not going to engage users at the level you require. Now, in his Inner Circle, Frank spends time with you to share his 20 years of experience in UX to really help you understand what works, why it works, and how to do it. You're going to advance your practical UX knowledge. Now, I could tell you a lot more about this, but if you want to find out more, just go to www.uxinnercircle.com. That's www.uxinnercircle.com. uxinnercircle.com. And I know that when you connect with him, you're going to have an incredible time. You're going to learn a lot and come away stronger as a UX designer because of that. So that's all for today. I hope that you've enjoyed the episode, and I can't wait to be back with you next time. We're going to go further into this journey together on understanding UX design. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to, and why not leave a comment? It really helps when someone just shares their experience saying, hey, I learned a lot about this, help me do my job better, or help me appreciate UX design more. And that really helps us get out to meet more people and grow this community. So thank you for your support, and I can't wait to be with you again next time.